Chagiga Daf Chav Gimel continues explaining our Mishnah. It explains the next three examples that our Mishnah brings of how the halachos of Truma are different than the halachos of Kodesh as far as Tumah and Tefillah and Tahara are concerned. So Gemara is now going to discuss the halacha that one who is carrying a medris, carrying something which was sat on or stood on by a zava, nida or a zava, is not allowed to carry Kodesh, but he is allowed to carry Truma. That'll be example number one. Second thing we will discuss is the halacha that if you finish making a kli, as far as you know it's tahar, you still have to put it in the mikveh before you can use it for a kodesh, but you can use it right away for truma. And the third halacha will be the halacha that if you have a number of different objects in a kli, they're considered to be one, such as the halachos of kodesh are concerned that if something touches one of them, it's considered to have touched all of them, but that's not true by truma. Tomorrow is going to go through these and explain the source and the reasoning for each one. So the Gemara begins discussing the halacha of medris. We know the halacha is that anything which is stood on, sat on, or lied upon by a zav or nida gets the halachas of tumas medris. That is, as long as it is something which is roy for him to stand on, sit on, or lay upon. Something which is not supposed to be doing those things on does not get those halachos. So the Gemara has seen the Mishnah where we said that somebody who's carrying one of these objects is not allowed to carry a barrel of Kodesh, but is allowed to carry a barrel of Truma. Now, he's not going to actually be metame the barrel, because the barrel itself is cheres, it's made of earthenware, which is not makabel tumah from its outside. But still, we say he can't carry Kodesh. Gemara says, what's the reason? Gemara says, because of an incident that happened where somebody was carrying a barrel of Kodesh wine, and he had a shoe which was worn by his zav, and therefore was tumas medrash, and the strap of the shoe broke. Took it off in order to fix it, and he put it on the lip of the barrel. He bounced it on the barrel, and it fell into the barrel. There was matame everything in the barrel. Because of that, they said you can't carry Kodesh if you got medris Tumah. So Gemara says, why does that not apply to Truma as well? So Gemara says it doesn't apply to Truma as well, because this is the opinion of Hanani ben Akavi. It says whenever they made an Isra, it was based on an incident that happened, they only made it in a scenario very similar to that actual incident that happened. And he says that concerning halacha that was made about carrying mechatos, carrying paraduma water and ashes from one place to another. There, the Rabbanan also made a gzera based on an incident that happened. And there's a machlokes between Rabbi Hanani ben Akavia and the Chachamim. Where did they apply to? According to the Chachamim, the problem happened when they was crossing a river, and therefore they made the Isser on crossing all rivers. According to Rav Chanan ben Akavia, it was only made on the specific river that was being crossed, and that was the Jordan River, the Yarden. So therefore, the answer over here to our question will also be that they only made the Isser on Kodesh, because that's where this incident happened. And that's Rav Chanan ben Akavia's opinion. You only make the Isser based on a story, and the exact same story. However, to make it on Truma, that's not where the story happened, so they didn't make the Yisur there. Now the Gemara just goes into the machlokes of Rav Chanan ben Akavia and the Chamim. What are they talking about? What happened? And what was the Yisur that was made? So the Gemara says the story that happened was that somebody was carrying paraduma water across the Jordan River, and he went across in a boat. He used the boat to cross the river, and they found a piece of a mace in the bottom of the boat, and therefore that was metame, the paraduma water and ashes that he had with him, and that was a terrible thing. So therefore they made a rule from henceforth: you cannot carry any paraduma in the air, anything which is not on the ground. You can only walk on the ground. If you need to cross a river, you got a problem because you can't walk on the ground. So the only solution is to walk on a bridge. Cannot do anything else which is transporting through the air, because anytime you're transporting through the air, you are very susceptible to the halachos of tumas oel. You could have any tumah in the kli, the boat, the ship, whatever it is you're using to get across. So what's an example of transferring across the river? So you can't take a boat across the river. You cannot float it across the river because it's not fixed on the ground. You can't even ride an animal. You can't ride on your friend's shoulders. You can't even throw it across the river. Any of these things are all included in transporting through the air, and therefore you're not allowed to do it. And of course, the machlokes between Rav Chanan ben Akavia and the Chamim is this apply only to the Jordan River or to all rivers? Okay, now the Gemara has three questions on the halachos of the shoe that you're not allowed to carry, you're not allowed to wear or have a tumas medras shoe while you're carrying a barrel of kodesh. So the Gemara says the story that happened, it was a tamei shoe and an open barrel. The Gemara says, how far are we going to take this gzera? Would we say that you should also not have a tahor shoe as a gzera atu a tamei shoe? Or would we say you can't even carry a sealed barrel as a gzera atu an open barrel? Next, the Gemara asks, what if he violated this and he did go and he carry it? Do we say that we consider it to be tamei because he violated the rule we made, or do we say, listen, as long as nothing happened, it's tahar? So the Gemara's quotes of Ila He says I could at least resolve that if he did carry it, it is tamei. Now Rav Zera though disagrees. He says no, if you did carry it and you violated it, it's still tahar. Nothing actually happened. The Gemara now moves on to discuss the next example in the Mishnah of a difference between the halachas of truma and the halachas of kodesh, and that is if you're working on making a kli, and the halacha of a kli is that until it's finished, it cannot be mekabel tuma. Now, in the final stages of this kli, you started being very careful that it shouldn't become tamei in any way, and therefore, as it finished, when it's now over, you know that it's tahar for sure. So, is that enough to use the kli without having to put it in mikvah or anything? It sounds like it should be, because while it was still unfinished and it's not mekabel tuma, you started being careful it shouldn't become tamei. So from the moment it was finished, it was already under close watch. So Gemara says that's enough for truma. It's not enough for kodesh. For kodesh, you have to put it in the mikveh anyway. So Gemara says, why should that be? How could it possibly have become tamei? So Gemara says, well, who made the kli? If it was made by a Talmud Chacham, you're right. There shouldn't be any reason for that. If it was made by an Am Haaretz, then you can't call it that it was watched. Any kli that's being handled by an Am Haaretz is considered to be tamei for sure. We have a rule we consider to be Am Haaretzim who are not careful in Hilchos Tum. We consider them to be tamei entirely. The Gemara answers that the situation here is where the kli is being made by a Talmud Chacham, and therefore he's keeping an eye on it that it should be tahar. However, we're afraid that in the stages before he started watching it, when he was not careful with it because it was not makabel tumah anyway, there was an Am Haaretz around, and that Am Haaretz was a zav, and that zav had some spittle fly from his mouth and landed on the kli. Now, the Talmud Chacham didn't think of anything of it at the time, and probably didn't even see, and he wasn't careful. But the halacha is that spittle continues to be a source of tumah as long as it's moist. And now, once he went and finished the kli, this spittle was still on there, and it's the saliva of a zav. The halacha is that the saliva of a zav, as long as it's moist, is still an avatumah, and it's still in the time of the kli. So that's why this kli is possibly becoming tamei now, once it's completed, even though you're guarding it from anything coming in contact with it. You're not aware that there's a bit of saliva on there, even though it's being made by a Talmud Chacham, it's got that saliva from an Am Haaretz or from a zav before. So Gemara says, okay, fine, I'll accept that. Now we're going to see how this compares to a machlokes between Rav Elazar and Rav Yeshua in a very similar scenario concerning making a kli to use for paraduma water. So Gemara first makes a diak over here. In our Mishnah, it only said that it needs to be put in the mikvah in order to be used for karbanos. It did not say that it needs hair of shemesh. Generally, the halacha is that something which is tamei, once you put it in the mikvah, it's in a in-between tahara state. It's not fully pure until the sun goes down, until the day ends. You put it in the mikvah, so it's not real tamei, but it's something called tevul yom. It's a middle level of tamah. Now, the halacha of tevul yom is generally you cannot use it for any karbanos. The one exception is paraduma things. Paraduma, you're allowed to use it teful yom. The Chachamim have a special gzera where they learn from the extra statement where it says tahar. It's referring to someone who even has a little bit of tahara or something that has a little bit of tahara that you're allowed to use. And therefore, tefil yom is okay for a paraduma, special gzera sekasif. Now that is something which the Chachamim learned and that Tzedukim disagreed with. That Tzedukim didn't have that at Joshua. So the Chachamim went out of their way to use tefil yom things which went in the mikvah, things which were tamei, were put in the mikvah, but had not had the sun go down. They went out of the way to use those things for paraduma to show that the Tzedukim were wrong. Now the Gemara has an example of something which is made for paraduma, and what do we do with it? So the Gemara quotes a Mishnah which says if you have a tube and you cut the tube in order to use it as a storage container for paraduma water, so Rabbi Elazar says you can put it in the mikvah right away. You assume that it's tamei. Rabbi Yeshua says no, you have to go be metamei it. You have to make it tamei in order for us to be able to show that we're going to use it as a tefil yom, that we're going to use it even before the sun goes down. Now, why does Rav Elazar say that it's considered to be tamei anyway, even though no tumah came in contact with it? So the Gemara says same reason, because we're afraid that some zav spit on it, and the saliva is still there, and the saliva is still producing tumah. Therefore, we give it the status of tumah, even though we're not aware of tumah. You got to put it in the mikvah right away. Now, since I'm putting it in the mikvah, it becomes like it has a tefil yom, like it's waiting for herav shemesh, and therefore I could use it now, and that will show that the tzdukim are wrong. Now, Rabbi Yeshua says no, you can't rely on a maybe tumah status that you're having. You're going to assume that it's tummy, you're not aware of it. You have to actually be metami. Rashi says you have to go take a source of tumah, a dead sheretz, touch it to this tube, which you're now planning to use, then put it in the mikvah. Oh, now it's a tefil yom, and now if you use it right away, you'll show that the tzedukah are wrong. You don't have to wait till the sun goes down. You don't have to wait until it's not a tefil yom anymore. You don't have to wait for herav shemesh. So Gemara says, the problem is as follows. According to Rav Yeshua, I understand why you're showing that the Tzedukim are wrong, because you touch this thing to a dead sheretz. It's obviously a tful yom. Normally, any kli which touches a dead sheretz, you would have to wait until the sun goes down, even after it went into the mikvah. However, according to Rav Elazar, that the only tum I have here is because it's something which was just recently made, and I'm afraid that there was spittle of a zav on there. So, in a general situation where it's not a paraduma kli, you told me I could use it right away for kabbanos. You told me I don't have to wait for Harav Shemesh because I'm only keeping a mild level of concern. I don't really know that there's tumah here. I just have to do tefillah. You didn't say I have to wait until Harav Shemesh to use it. So if every other kli which is not paraduma, I don't have to wait until the sun goes down. How do you show here that you're using this thing even though it's a tefil yom? It's not a tefil yom. It's the same as any other kli that was made, and you're afraid that there was zav saliva on there. Just like any other kli you could use, and it doesn't have the status of tefil yom, you could also use this, and it doesn't mean that you're using it because it's a paraduma, and tefil yom is okay for a paraduma. So what's the sign? What's the hacker? How are you showing that tzedukim is wrong? So Gemara answers an answer which is challenged, and there's a bit of a back and forth on it. The Gemara says when they created the status of this tumah, where we're afraid that a zav has saliva on it, we created a tumah, we gave it the halacha as if it touched a sheretz. We said any new kli that's finished, you have to consider like it touched a sheretz. Therefore, when you look at it, you compare it to any other kli that touched a sheretz. Any other kli that touched a sheretz requires to wait for the sun to come down. Here also, we require to wait for the sun to come down, and that's a specific halacha in this paraduma thing, where you had this shvoferes. We said, you made a paraduma storage container that now has a halacha of a kli which touched the sheretz. Automatic, they're abanon because we're afraid of zav spittle, whatever it is. So therefore, we're gonna show that the tzedukim are wrong because we gave it the halacha of a kli which touched the sheretz. Yet we don't wait for the sun to go down. So you see, a tefillah yom is not a problem for a paraduma. So the Gemara challenges that. The Gemara says it can't be you gave it the halachos of a sheretz because then it should not be able to be mitame people. Because something which touches the sheretz is a sheni l'tuma, it's a rishon l'tuma, and a rishon cannot be matami a person who touches it. But we have a brayso that says clearly that the person who puts it in the mikvah has to go to the mikvah himself. He became tummy. Someone says, okay, we'll change the halacha. We didn't make it like this tube touched the sheretz. We made it like it touched the mace, and therefore it is an avatuma, something which touches a mace gets a lach of an avatama, and it's matame a person who touches it afterwards. So that can't be, because if it has the lach of something which touches a mace, you have to sprinkle on it paraduma water on the third day and on the seventh day. And we're not doing that here. So says, okay, what we mean to say is we gave it the halacha of something which touched the mace 7 days after it touched the mace, and all the sprinkling is done already. And all it needs to do is go to the mikvah, but there it clearly has to wait for Harav Shemesh. It's clearly called a tefil yom, and therefore, by the fact that we're saying that this thing does not have to wait for the sun to go down, we're showing that tzedukim are wrong. The Gemara says there's a problem, and that is that we know that in all the special rules of Tumah which created for Paraduma, we didn't make anything up. We didn't invent anything which is not found anywhere else. So you can't tell me we invented a rule that it's Tumas Mace. It's not the... Where would we invent a rule like that? We said we didn't invent things. We maybe made some existing rules a little stricter, but we can't invent that it's Tumas Mace. So our answer is no. When we say we didn't invent anything, we mean to say we didn't invent Tumah on a Kli which is not Makabel Tumah, which is a Kli which is not susceptible to that type of a Tumah itself. But we had an existing Tumah somewhere else, we could apply that concept to something which is Roy to be Makabel Tumah. It's only to say that something which can't get that Tumah will get the Tumah, that's something which we didn't make. What's an example of that? Sigmar says, Medris. When a Zav, Zava, or Nida stands, lies, or sits on a Kli, that Kli becomes Tummy Tumah's Medris. That's only if it's something that is normal to stand, lie, or sit upon. If he sits on a basket, or a container, or a crate, that's not a chair, and it cannot be Matama that Tumas Moshev. That halacha we didn't change. We wouldn't we say that something which can't get Tumas Medrash gets Tumas Medrash in Hilchas and Paradum. That we didn't do. But to say that this is Tumas Mace, even though it wasn't actually Tumas Mace, that's not called too big of a chiddush, and that we did do, and that's not a problem. Gemara now moves on to its third example in the Mishnah of a difference between the halachas of Truma and Karbanos, of Kodesh. And that is the halacha that if you have a number of objects in a Kli, you touch one of them, So as far as the halachos of kodesh are concerned, it's considered as if you touched all of them. They all get the same level of tumah as the one that you touched. According to, as far as the halachos of truma, though, we say no, they aren't considered to be one thing, and the one you touched is, let's say, the rishon, and the one that touches that is the sheni, and one that touches that is the shlishi. So it says, how do you know this halacha? Gemara says, Reb Chanin says, it's learned out of a pasuk discussing the karbonos that were brought by the Nesim. It says, Kaf achas asara zahav malaya ketoras. One spoonful of, one golden spoonful that was filled with ketoras. So you see, the entire spoonful filled with ketoras is all considered achas. It's one spoonful, it's viewed as one. It's all one object. Gemara says, well, that sounds like it's a halacha d'oraisa. The problem is it has to be halacha d'Rabbanan. And the reason is because we have a brisa that says, and Rabbi Akiva added on additional halachos to this. In the beginning of the brisa there was talking about the ashes of a paraduma that touch a tameh. Part of it is tameh, all of it is tameh. That's definitely halacha d'Rabbanan because you can't learn paraduma out of ketoras. Ketoras paraduma is paraduma. We can only learn to other karbanos. The paraduma is not considered kachei mizbeach. It's not something which goes on the mizbeach. Its entire avoda is outside the azara. So it cannot be that that's learned out of that derai. So that has to be d'Rabbanan. And it says Rabbi Akiva added on to that other things. He added on flour of carbon mincha, ketores, spices, lavona, coals, all these things he added on. That means he added on to a d'Rabbanan. That means they're also d'Rabbanan as well. So that doesn't fit with Reb Chanin, who has a pasuk for them. He has a source showing that they are d'oraisa. So our answer is Rabbi Akiva added on a certain halacha to them. He didn't add on that these all count. He added on a halacha d'Rabbanan. There's a certain halacha that's d'Rabbanan. The ikar halacha, that if you touch one, you touch them all, that's a din d'oraisa. Rabbi Akiva added on an additional thing. That's d'Rabbanan. What's the additional thing he added? So Gemara has two attempts to try that. His first attempt is that it applies to even to an object which doesn't have to be put in a kli. If you have flour of karbonos, so it has to be put in a kli, so that's one thing. But the carbon mincha can be taken out of a kli afterwards. And the flour doesn't have to be in a kli afterwards. You could just have it in a cloth. It doesn't have to be in kli shares. So if it is something which has to be in the kli, so I understand the kli makes it all one. That's the din d'oraisa. To say that even flour, which could be taken out of the kli, that still has the same halacha that if you touch one, you touched all of them, that's a halacha d'Rabbanan that was added by Rabbi Akiva. So Gemara says, okay, that's good for flour, but what about ketoras, lavona, coals? What about all that? So Gemara says, there, the extra halacha d'Rabbanan is that it doesn't have to be a kli that has an inside to it, that has a shape that holds things. It could even just be a flat mat. That is not included in the d'oraisa, and that's what Rabbi Yochanan added midrabanan.